The cassette tape showed up on the doorstep of a quiet suburban home in upstate New York, left without a note, envelope, or explanation. It was a battered black cassette with a faded handwritten label that read, Binmar Twins, 1978. To anyone else, it might have looked like junk from a yard sale or a prank, but not to Dr. Eleanor Winters. The name Binmar stopped her cold. Binmar. That name had haunted the margins of her research for years, like a whisper just out of reach. Eleanor wasn't just another university professor. She taught linguistics at Cornell, specializing in rare phonetic structures and lost dialects, particularly extinct branches of Proto-Celtic languages. But her name was better known in fringe academic circles for something far more controversial. Her theories on xenoglossy, the mysterious phenomenon where individuals speak languages they've never learned. Most of her peers dismissed her work as pseudoscience. She preferred to call it an unexplained frontier. And now that frontier had just arrived on her front step. The tape sat untouched on her desk for 3 days. On the 4th night, something in her gave way. Maybe it was the steady patter of rain on the window. Maybe it was the strange, inexplicable pressure she'd felt ever since she found it. Like the tape wanted to be heard. When she finally pressed play, static crackled from the speakers, followed by a man's unsteady voice. This is Dr. Alan Morris, child psychologist, Binmar Regional Hospital. Subject interview, June 12, 1978. Present are myself and the Morgan twins, Ellie and Evan, age 8. Then, silence. And after that, a sound Eleanor would never forget. 2 young voices speaking in perfect synchrony, yet not in English. Not in any language she recognized. The cadence was hypnotic, otherworldly. Guttural clicks rose into lilting, melodic hums that flowed like ocean currents. Consonants seemed to collapse in on themselves. Vowels stretched and swayed as if gravity had no hold on them. It was beautiful and wrong. She played the recording 7 times that night. By dawn, her course was set. She packed her bags and caught the earliest train to upstate New York, heading for the place she'd only ever seen referenced in scattered footnotes and whispered interviews. A place called Binmar. It was no longer a town in any real sense. Just a forgotten outpost nestled in the shadow of the Catskills, where the ghosts of industry still clung to broken buildings. Rain fell like a shroud over the neat rows of old workers' cottages. Even before stepping off the platform, she could feel it. Something here was still listening. The public library, once a grand Victorian town hall, had been reduced to a single room lined with water-warped shelves. Its keeper, Mrs. Powell, was a stern woman in her 70s whose grey hair was pulled back so tight it looked like a helmet. When Eleanor asked about the Morgan twins, the room seemed to grow colder. Why would you be asking about them now? Her upstate accent carried a weight of suspicion. Eleanor carefully explained her academic interest in unique language development in children, leaving out any mention of xenoglossy. I'm researching rare communication phenomena, twin languages specifically. Mrs. Powell's hands trembled slightly as she sorted through a pile of old index cards. You'll want Dr. Harris over at the community center, she said at last. He was here long before the incident. The word incident hit the air like a dropped knife. What incident? Mrs. Powell's eyes shifted to the rain sliding down the window like tears. The disappearance, of course. Whole town felt it. Still does. The community center had once been a church. Now it housed pamphlets on heart health and flu shots, but Eleanor wasn't fooled. This building had seen pain. Inside, she met Dr. William Harris, a gaunt man with weary eyes that had witnessed too much. When she mentioned her interest in the Morgan twins, he didn't smile. He just gestured for her to sit. That's a name I haven't heard spoken aloud in decades, he said softly. Sit down, Dr. Winters. This might take a while. And so began a story that would undo everything Eleanor thought she knew about language, science, and the limits of human comprehension. A story that didn't end with the twins' disappearance, but began there. According to Dr. Harris, the Morgan twins arrived in Binmar on a freezing night in January 1978. They'd been found wandering barefoot along the shoulder of Highway 28 in the middle of a snowstorm. A truck driver nearly hit them. He said they were standing hand in hand in the middle of the road, dressed in nothing but thin pajamas, completely unfazed by the bitter cold. That wasn't the strangest part. The driver swore their skin was warm, not lukewarm, hot like they'd just stepped out of a bath. No signs of frostbite, no shivering. Just two pale children with hair so blonde it looked almost white, staring up at him without blinking. They didn't speak, not in English, not in anything the EMTs or hospital staff could understand. Social services placed them temporarily at Binmar Children's Home while authorities tried to locate their parents. There were no missing persons reports that matched. No documentation. No one came forward. It was as if they had simply materialized from nowhere. Eleanor sat in stunned silence as Dr. Harris recounted the details. His voice was even, clinical, but his eyes betrayed a quiet dread. I examined them the day after they arrived, he continued. Physically, they were fine, small for their age, but healthy. No bruises, no signs of abuse, but their eyes, those eyes stuck with people. Black, not dark brown. Black all the way through, like staring into a tunnel. That was when the language began. At first, the staff assumed it was cryptophagia, a private language that some twins develop in early childhood. But the more experts listened, the more they realized this was something else entirely. The twins weren't improvising. Their speech had structure, syntax, repeatable phonemes. It meant something. Dr. Alan Morris, the regional child psychologist, had taken a particular interest. He recorded hours of the twins' conversations, transcribed pages of symbols. He became obsessed, Harris said grimly. Claimed their language had roots in ancient Proto-Celtic, older than any known dialect. That caught Eleanor's attention. Proto-Celtic, but that would predate written language. Exactly, Harris nodded. He started working with a professor from Albany, someone who specialized in pre-Indo-European linguistics. Said there were patterns, mathematical precision, and then something changed. What do you mean? Harris's hands curled slightly on the desk. Dr. Morris wasn't just studying them anymore. He was listening all the time. Said their language wasn't just communication. It was an invocation, a key. He talked about thin places, fault lines between worlds. Eleanor felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain still tapping against the windows outside. How long did the twins stay at the home? She asked. 6 months, Harris replied. During that time, they attended the local elementary school, but they never fit in. The other kids avoided them. Some were afraid. Others got hurt. Hurt how? He hesitated. A boy teased them once. Came down with a strange rash the same day, spread over his whole body in hours. A girl who refused to let them join a game broke both arms falling down the stairs. A teacher separated them once for misbehavior. The class pet was dead the next morning. It felt like something was pushing back. Coincidences, maybe. But in a small town, enough coincidences start to look like evidence, and in Binmar, superstition had a long half-life. There were whispers, Harris said. Some folks said the twins weren't human, that they were changelings. Fairy children. Ridiculous, of course. But the older folks believed it, especially after the fire. What fire? Eleanor leaned forward. The hospital, Harris replied. A week after the twins disappeared, the entire psychiatric wing burned to the ground. And Dr. Morris? He looked away for a moment. They found his body in his office. Smoke inhalation, they said. But the fire started right where he kept his notes and tapes. The official cause was faulty wiring. But I knew Morris. He'd been careful. too careful. Eleanor's heart pounded. And the twins? When exactly did they vanish? Harris met her gaze. The same night, June 20th, the night of the fire. They were asleep at midnight, Dr. Harris said, his voice hushed now. Night staff checked on them. Nothing seemed unusual. By morning, they were gone. Eleanor stared at him, waiting for more, but he only shook his head. No forced entry, no broken windows. Their beds were made, pajamas folded on the pillows. It was like they'd vanished into thin air. What about a search? She asked, though she already knew the answer. The largest in town history. Police, dogs, volunteers. They scoured the woods, the mines, the reservoir. Nothing. No footprints, no sightings. They were just gone. The silence stretched between them, thick and uneasy. Then Dr. Harris leaned in slightly, lowering his voice even further. There was one thing, he said, something the official reports didn't mention. The night they disappeared, every dog in Binmar howled, all night, from dusk till dawn. Eleanor felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck. And at the children's home, he continued, they found markings above the twins' beds, symbols etched into the plaster, not painted, not carved, burned, like the wall itself had changed. What kind of symbols? Eleanor asked. Ones no one could identify, except Morris. He'd drawn similar symbols in his notes, claimed they were phonemes, components of the twins' language, said they matched no known linguistic system, but obeyed a logic older than any we'd seen. The chill deepened. Eleanor already knew those notes were gone, consumed in the fire that took Morris's life. But something about Harris's tone suggested there was more. What happened to the home after that? She asked. Demolished in '83, he said. Too many incidents. Officially, it was about structural concerns, but between you and me, strange things kept happening, especially in the twins' old room. Like what? Kids sleepwalking, hearing voices. One girl said the twins spoke to her through the wall, said they were waiting in the in-between. She was found scratching symbols into her skin with a hairpin. Eleanor took a breath, trying to process it all. Do you know if anyone else from the home might still be around? Staff who worked with the children? Harris nodded slowly. Margaret Jones. She was matron in '78. Lives over on Brinley Terrace, last I heard. If anyone remembers more than I do, it's her. He reached for a notepad and scribbled an address. But I'll warn you, she doesn't like to talk about them. Says it brings on nightmares. Later that afternoon, Eleanor made her way to Brinley Terrace, a lonely street on the edge of town where the houses all looked like they were holding their breath. Margaret Jones lived at the far end, in a stone cottage that stood stubbornly upright, resisting time and weather. The garden was neat, the windows polished. The past hadn't let go here. It had simply been dusted and put in order. When Eleanor knocked, the door opened almost instantly. A tall woman in her 70s stood there, solidly built, her hair pulled back in a severe twist. Her eyes were sharp and unreadable. "Dr. Winters," she said. "Bill called ahead, said you'd be coming." She didn't invite her in right away. Instead, she studied Eleanor's face like she was inspecting a crack in the foundation. Eventually, she stepped aside. "Don't know what good it'll do digging up ghosts," she muttered. "But come in, then." The inside of the cottage was immaculate. Everything had its place. Photographs lined the mantel. Children, grandchildren, happy smiles framed in order. It all felt oddly at odds with the story Eleanor had come to hear. Margaret poured tea into fine china cups that seemed too delicate for her large, work-worn hands. "So," she said finally, "you want to know about the Morgan twins?" "Yes," Eleanor said softly. "Everything you remember." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. They weren't like other children. Never were. She paused, then added with quiet certainty, "They moved like one person in two bodies." Eleanor didn't speak. She knew better than to interrupt a memory already surfacing. Even their heartbeats matched, Margaret said. Nurse confirmed it during checkups. They didn't just speak together, Margaret continued, her eyes focused somewhere beyond the tidy walls of her living room. They breathed together, ate at the same pace, slept in mirrored positions, like one mind split between two forms. I've worked with a lot of children, Dr. Winters. I've never seen anything like it. Eleanor nodded slowly, letting the silence draw out. Margaret took a sip of tea, then rested the cup carefully on its saucer. But the way they spoke, she said at last, her voice lowering. That wasn't normal, not even for twins. That sound, it made your stomach knot, like music played in a key that shouldn't exist. There was rhythm, sure. Melody, even. But wrong. Wrong in a way that made the other children cry. You said the staff felt it too, Eleanor asked gently. We did our best not to show it, Margaret admitted. But yes, we felt it. It was like their voices scraped against something inside your head. Something soft and unguarded. She paused again, then leaned forward slightly. And it wasn't just the language. It was what happened when they spoke it. Eleanor's heart rate ticked up. What do you mean? They used to stand at the window at night, Margaret said. Every night, same time. Just stood there, staring into the dark and talking in that language. That's when the birds would come. Birds? She nodded. Sparrows, crows, starlings, whatever lived nearby. They'd gather on the sill, silently watching, never made a sound. Just sat there, sometimes all night. That's impossible, Eleanor said softly. Margaret gave a dry, humorless smile. Lot of impossible things happened around those two. Plants in their room grew twice as fast as anywhere else. We had a ficus in there that bloomed in December. And the cat, our mouser, big old Tom named Winston, he wouldn't go near their room, wouldn't even walk past the door, used to yowl if you tried to carry him close. Eleanor's mind was racing, piecing it all together. Did the twins ever speak English? Margaret hesitated. Sometimes. Rarely. But when they did, it was eerie. They spoke in perfect, accentless sentences, but always the same ones, like lines from a play they didn't understand. Do you remember what they said? She nodded grimly. The door's thin here. The stars are almost right. They're waiting for us. Eleanor felt a cold weight settle in her chest. And the night they vanished? She asked. I wasn't on duty, Margaret said, voice suddenly distant. My daughter had the flu. I swapped with Anne Pritchard. Could I speak with Anne? Margaret didn't answer right away. Then she turned and looked Eleanor dead in the eye. Anne hanged herself. 6 months later, out in her garden shed. Left a note that said, They're coming back and I can't be here when they do. The words hit Eleanor like a fist. Did she ever talk about what happened that night? No, Margaret said. But a week before she died, she gave me something. Said if anyone ever came looking, really looking, I was to pass it on and be done with it. She stood, walked to a cabinet in the corner, and retrieved a small pine box. She placed it in Eleanor's hands. It was heavier than it looked. I've never opened it, Margaret said. I honored her wish, but now it's yours. Eleanor ran her fingers across the box's surface. It was plain, unadorned, save for a small brass clasp. There's something else, Margaret added quietly. Something I've never told anyone. Eleanor didn't speak. She just waited. The day before they disappeared, I found them in the garden, drawing those symbols of theirs in the dirt, a whole circle of them. Her voice dropped to a whisper. When they saw me, they smiled. First time I'd ever seen them smile. Then they said something. Not in English, but I understood it anyway. They didn't speak in English, Margaret whispered, eyes fixed on the memory. But for one moment, just one, something shifted. It was like the meaning passed straight into my mind, like I felt what they were saying. Eleanor leaned forward, heart thudding. What did you understand? Margaret's voice was barely audible. They said, the door opens when the stars align. Then they went back to their drawings like nothing happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't sleep for days after. Eleanor stared down at the box in her hands. Anne Pritchard had kept this for decades, entrusted to someone who refused to even peek inside. And now it belonged to her. She stood slowly, sensing that Margaret had given all she could. Thank you, she said gently, for your honesty. For this. Margaret nodded, but her gaze had grown distant again. Whatever you're chasing, Dr. Winters, I hope you don't find it. Back in her room at the Red Lion Inn, Eleanor set the pine box on the bed and sat across from it. Outside, night had fallen like a curtain. Rain tapped softly against the glass. The room was quiet, too quiet. Every instinct screamed that something waited inside that box. She unlatched the brass clasp. Inside were two items: a worn, stained notebook and a cassette tape. The notebook's first page was dated January 1978. It was Anne Pritchard's diary. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. The early entries were mundane. Notes about staff schedules, meals, weather complaints. But then the tone began to shift. February 3rd, 1978. The twins spoke for over an hour in that strange language. I recorded some of it. Playing it back gave me a headache so bad I had to lie down. The rhythm makes my teeth ache. February 15th. Dr. Morris spent all day with them. He says their language is mathematical. He's starting to learn it. Simple phrases, he claims. He looks feverish when he talks about it, like a man who's touched something sacred or dangerous. March 20th. Found them sleepwalking, both standing at the window, whispering in unison. I touched Ellie's shoulder, and they turned at the same moment. Their eyes didn't see me. They said one word, Igni, then went back to bed. The entries continued, each one darker than the last. Anne wrote about symbols appearing in condensation on the windows, scratched into books, even forming in dust. She mentioned the twins speaking fluent English, but only to repeat the same chilling sentences. The door's thin here. They're waiting for us. The stars are almost right. Eleanor flipped to the final entry, dated June 20th, the night of the fire. Her throat tightened as she read. They smiled at me tonight. Too wide, too many teeth. I must be imagining things. Dr. Morris called, frantic. Said he's found something, that it's not a language. It's a key. I'm outside their room now. It's midnight. They're whispering again. I can hear them clearly despite the closed door. They're counting down. In Old Welsh, my grandmother's tongue. They've never spoken it before. When they reach one, the entry ended there. With a deep breath, Eleanor picked up the cassette and slid it into her portable player. Static. Then Anne's voice. Nervous. Unsteady. February 3rd. Sample of the twins' language. The sounds that followed chilled Eleanor to the bone. Familiar but clearer than the earlier tape. The cadence, rising and falling, rhythmic, unnatural, seemed to vibrate beneath her skin, and underneath it all, a low hum too deep to be vocal, a frequency that pressed against her bones. She didn't realize she'd been mouthing the sounds until the tape stopped abruptly. Anne's voice cut in again, panicked. They've stopped. They're looking at me. They know I'm recording. Then static. Outside the window, a dog began to howl, then another, and another. Eleanor sat frozen, the recorder in her lap, heart pounding as the chorus of howls rose into the night. The howling outside built into a cacophony, echoing through the narrow streets of Binmar like a warning carried on the wind. Eleanor stood by the window, staring into the rain-soaked darkness, her heart racing. It wasn't just one or two dogs. It was every dog in town, as if something ancient had stirred beneath their paws and they could feel it moving. Sleep was impossible. Instead, she spent the night poring over the diary and playing the tape again and again. The cadence of the twins' language had shifted from mystery to obsession, and worse, she could almost understand it. Not the literal words, but their intention. They weren't talking to each other. They weren't even talking to the adults around them. They were calling to something else. By morning, Eleanor had filled pages with symbols, phonetic notations, and fragmented translations. Her logical mind warned her she was slipping into the same fevered delusion that had consumed Dr. Morris. But she couldn't stop. She had to know. Just after sunrise, she left the inn and made her way to the edge of town where the children's home had once stood. All that remained now was an overgrown lot surrounded by a rusting chain-link fence and posted warnings. No trespassing. Dangerous grounds. Through the tangle of brambles, she could see the faint outline of the building's foundation, crumbling concrete that once held up decades of lost voices. As she stood at the fence, weighing whether to climb it, a voice behind her made her jump. "You won't find answers there." She turned to find a man in his 60s walking a border collie. His eyes were sharp, and though his face was weathered, it held the same haunted look she'd seen in Margaret and Harris. "Did you know the Morgan twins?" she asked. "Nobody really knew them," he said. "Not even the ones who lived with them. My sister went to school with them. She said they could talk to the dead. Said they told her they weren't really kids, just wearing children's bodies." He gave a weak chuckle, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was on the crew that tore that place down," he continued. "Back in '82, we found things in the walls." "What kind of things?" "Bird skeletons, hundreds. Sealed behind plaster like they'd flown in and couldn't get out. And those symbols, burned into the wood, the pipes, even the wiring. We started seeing them in our sleep. Woke up screaming some nights. Dreams of drowning, falling into darkness, voices whispering our names from underground." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "Did anything else happen during the demolition?" He nodded slowly. "One of the guys, Tony, big man, tough as they come. He quit halfway through. Said he saw the twins. Said they were standing at the far end of the lot just watching. Said they smiled at him. 2 kids that should have been long gone." "What do you think happened to them?" she asked. He shrugged. "Doesn't matter what I think. But this town was never the same after they disappeared. Like they took something with them. Hope, maybe. Or whatever holds the world together when you're not looking." He tugged gently on the dog's leash. "If you're smart, you'll forget all this. Go back to wherever you came from." But Eleanor couldn't forget. She wouldn't. She turned and walked back toward town, the man and his dog fading into the mist behind her. Her next stop was Binmar Regional Hospital. The east wing where the fire had started had never been rebuilt. The remaining structure served now as a community health center. She told the receptionist she was researching hospital history and was directed to the basement archives. There she met Mr. Jenkins, a thin, pale man whose eyes looked like they hadn't seen daylight in weeks. "Dr. Alan Morris," she said. "I'd like to see his personnel file." He blinked behind thick glasses. "Follow me." And as he led her into the shadowed maze of the archives, Eleanor felt the now familiar sense creeping in. Something watching. Waiting. Mr. Jenkins led her down a corridor lined with sagging shelves and flickering fluorescent lights that cast everything in a jaundiced haze. The archive air was cool and thick with dust, as though it hadn't moved in years. They stopped at a filing cabinet labeled Staff Records 1970-1980, and Jenkins opened the drawer with a metallic groan. "Not much left," he muttered, pulling out a slim folder. Most of Dr. Morris's research was destroyed in the fire. This is just employment stuff, performance reviews, internal memos. Eleanor accepted the file carefully. her fingertips already tingling before she even opened it. The folder smelled faintly of old paper and something she couldn't quite place. Ozone, maybe, or the aftertaste of static electricity. She flipped through the documents slowly. Dr. Morris had been a respected child psychologist, known for his work in developmental language disorders. The early notes in his file were glowing, methodical, compassionate, detail-oriented. But starting in March 1978, something shifted, increasingly preoccupied with Morgan case to exclusion of all other responsibilities. April 14th, refused directive to limit contact with subjects, displays signs of agitation, obsessive behavior. May 3, claims regarding non-human linguistic patterns are unsubstantiated. Concerns for psychological stability rising. The final note was dated 3 days before the fire. Recommendation for psychiatric evaluation. Morris now insists the twins are conduits to an external intelligence. Believes their language is not of earthly origin. Immediate intervention suggested. Eleanor closed the folder, her skin crawling. Was he under any personal stress? She asked. Jenkins shrugged. Before my time, I only know the stories. But you've heard them? He hesitated, then nodded. There's more to the fire than what's in the report. What do you mean? He looked around, then beckoned her deeper into the archive. They passed through another corridor where the shelving abruptly ended, giving way to bare concrete walls stained with soot. Jenkins stopped and pointed to a spot on the far wall. This is where the fire stopped. We never figured out why it didn't spread further. Eleanor stepped closer. The concrete here was slightly darker, and the air felt charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. At first, she saw nothing. Then, her eyes adjusted. Symbols. Dozens of them, faintly visible in the concrete. They weren't drawn or carved. They were part of the wall itself, burned into it. These weren't here before the fire, Jenkins said. No one knows how they got there. Lab tests couldn't find any residue, no accelerant, no tool marks. It's like they just appeared. Eleanor touched the wall lightly. The symbols pulsed faintly in her vision, not with light, but with a strange pressure, like a vibration behind her eyes. Do you know what they mean? She whispered. There was a professor who came in the early 80s, Jenkins replied. Name was Davis or Davies. From Albany, I think. He said they resembled pre-human pictographs, claimed they were coordinates, not spatial, but dimensional. And what happened to him? Jenkins shrugged again. The board didn't like his theories. Said he was stirring up panic. He left town not long after. No one's heard from him since. Eleanor stepped back from the wall, her mind spinning. She snapped a few photos with her phone, though even as she did, she had a strange certainty the images wouldn't come out right. You feel it, don't you? Jenkins said suddenly, eyes wide. What? That feeling. Like someone standing just behind you. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. That night, back at the inn, Eleanor sat surrounded by her notes, the diary, and both cassettes. She played Anne's recording again, now for the 9th time. As the voices began, she whispered along, almost unconsciously mimicking the sounds. She didn't notice when the howling started again outside, but this time it wasn't just dogs. At first, Eleanor thought the strange howls echoing through the streets were just more dogs. But the longer she listened, the more certain she became. These weren't canine voices. They were deeper, fragmented, layered. Some sounded like wet lungs struggling to breathe, others like whispers stretched across miles of stone. And beneath it all, a rhythmic pattern emerged. Not speech, but a response. Something was answering the twins' language. She stopped the cassette abruptly. The room seemed to contract, the air tightening as if the walls themselves were listening. Her breath came shallow. She stood and crossed to the window. The street below was deserted, empty save for the faint shimmer of rainfall under the street lamps. Yet something moved at the edge of vision. A flicker, a distortion, gone when looked at directly, but there in the corner of her eye. Watching. The phone on the nightstand rang. She stared at it. No one had the number. Slowly, she picked up the receiver. "Dr. Winters," came the voice, calm, precise. "Yes? This is Professor Emerist Davis. I believe you've been looking into my work." Eleanor's mouth went dry. "How did you—" "Small towns. Word travels. I need to speak with you," she said. "It's urgent." "No," Davis replied flatly. "What you need to do is leave Binmar. Tonight, before it happens." "Before what happens?" "You're following the same path Morris did," Davis continued, voice taut with warning. He thought the twins were an anomaly, something explainable, but he was wrong. He listened too long. "So have you." "I'm not afraid of strange language patterns," Eleanor snapped. "It's not a language," Davis interrupted. "That was Morris's mistake. He treated it like communication. It isn't. It's incantation." A silence stretched across the line, dense and electric. "They weren't talking to us," Davis continued. "They were calling, summoning. The words don't hold meaning, they hold function, like coordinates in a multi-dimensional map." Eleanor gripped the phone tighter. "Coordinates to where?" "To thin places," he said. "Cracks between our world and what's underneath. The memory of the cave symbols, the subsonic hum on the recordings, the bird skeletons walled inside the children's home, all of it collided in her mind like thunder. "They're coming back tonight, aren't they?" she said quietly. Davis didn't answer at first. Then, with grim certainty, he said, "The stars are aligned, just like in 78. That's when the door opens." "And if I find it first?" she asked. "You won't close it," he replied. "You'll only help it open wider." The line went dead. Eleanor stood there, staring at the receiver, her thoughts whirling. She gathered her notes, the cassettes, and Anne's diary, stuffing everything into her satchel. She didn't know what she was going to do, but she knew where she had to go. The old mine. From her window, she could see its entrance, a dark smudge on the hillside, almost invisible beneath the curtain of rain. It had been sealed years ago, but she'd noticed the rusted gate sagging when she first arrived in town. Something told her it wasn't sealed tight anymore. She stepped outside into the downpour, her flashlight in one hand, and her satchel clutched to her chest. The streets were silent. Not just empty. Vacant, like the town itself was holding its breath. Windows were dark. Doors shut tight. Even the Red Lion's pub was closed, its usual clamor swallowed by the storm. The closer she got to the mine, the heavier the air became. The ground beneath her boots vibrated faintly, like something enormous turning over in its sleep beneath the earth. The gate creaked open at her touch. Inside, the darkness was absolute. And there it was again, that sound. Faint at first, almost like a heartbeat. Then stronger, layered, familiar, the twins' language, but not from children's mouths. It was deeper now, adult voices. She stepped forward into the tunnel. The flashlight's narrow beam struggled against the overwhelming darkness inside the mine shaft. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling, echoing off rusted tracks that snaked deeper into the earth. Eleanor's boots splashed through shallow puddles, each step sending ripples across the floor like tremors. And always, just ahead, that sound, the language. But it wasn't a recording this time. It was real. Live. The cadence rose and fell like breath, like waves echoing from somewhere far below. Except the voices weren't childish now. They were lower, more resonant. A familiar pattern twisted by time and age, still in perfect unison. The tunnel sloped downward. The air grew colder, denser. Eleanor's breath steamed in front of her face, catching the beam of light like smoke. Her fingers trembled. Not from cold, but from something older, deeper. Fear wrapped around her spine like a coiled serpent. She reached the end of the tunnel. The space beyond opened into a vast natural cavern, the ceiling lost in shadow. The walls shimmered with dampness, or something like it, glowing faintly in hues not found in the normal spectrum. Green that looked too sharp, blue that pulsed like a heartbeat, and carved into every visible surface were the symbols. Thousands of them, more complex than any she'd seen before. They weren't painted or scratched, they were part of the stone, as if the cave itself had been born with them. In the center of the chamber stood two figures. They faced the far wall, hand in hand, backs to her. Pale hair fell down their spines, white as salt. They wore simple garments, gray, seamless, like fabric woven from fog. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. It was them, the Morgan twins. But they were no longer 8 years old. They stood tall, slender, and motionless, yet their voices poured out in that strange harmonic rhythm. They were adults now, but still perfectly synchronized. Two bodies, one voice. Their chant rolled through the chamber like a tide, vibrating in Eleanor's bones, stirring something beneath her skin. The symbols on the wall in front of them pulsed brighter with each word, forming a pattern that resembled a doorway. Not metaphorically, a literal doorway etched into the stone, glowing like a wound. Eleanor's heart pounded. She must have made a sound, her breath catching, a shoe scuffing stone, because the twins stopped chanting. Slowly, perfectly together, they turned to face her. Their eyes were bottomless black. No whites, no irises, just endless voids reflecting no light, only depth. Their faces were smooth, inhumanly symmetrical, no wrinkles, no emotion. But they smiled, and that smile, too wide, too many teeth, matched exactly what Margaret had described. "Dr. Eleanor Winters," they said in unison, their voices smooth, melodious, and utterly wrong. "You've been looking for us." She stood frozen, mouth dry, every instinct screaming for her to run, but she couldn't move. "Don't be afraid," they said, though the way they said it only deepened the fear. "You've done well. You're seeking, you're listening, your thoughts, all necessary, all preparation." "For what?" she whispered, voice barely audible. "For the opening," they replied. "The stars are aligned. The veil is thin, but the door requires 3 voices. A human voice, freely offered." "I didn't offer anything," she said, her voice trembling with defiance. They tilted their heads in perfect unison. "You spoke our words. Each time you played the tapes, each time you whispered the syllables, you joined the chorus, and so the door opens." Behind them, the symbols on the stone surged with light. The shape of the doorway began to shimmer, vibrating, the rock bending in ways rock should never bend. "You helped us," they said, "and now we help them." A sound like tearing fabric split the air. Eleanor turned her gaze to the doorway and saw that it was no longer just glowing stone. It was hollow now, open, and something was moving behind it, something coming through. The surface of the doorway rippled like liquid obsidian, folding inward to reveal not stone, but darkness. Not the absence of light, but something deeper, a moving blackness with depth and mass, like smoke with intention. The chanting resumed, louder now, layered with voices from beyond the twins. The sound wasn't just coming from their mouths anymore. It echoed from the walls, from the symbols, from inside Eleanor's own mind. Shapes began to form in the darkness. Tall, spindled silhouettes that moved without stepping, gliding as though swimming through dimensions not meant for human understanding. Their edges flickered, collapsing and reforming in ways her brain couldn't track. Tentacles, limbs, wings, none of it fixed, none of it still. They were becoming, and what they were becoming had no name. Eleanor staggered back, her hand trembling on the flashlight. The beam swept across the chamber, revealing more symbols, more patterns, all pulsing now in unison. She felt them vibrating through her chest cavity like a second heartbeat. Her breath came in shallow, panicked gasps. "You must complete it," the twins said, their eyes locked onto her, bottomless and unwavering. "No," Eleanor whispered. The chamber darkened further, the symbols glowing now with an internal radiance, casting long, unnatural shadows. Behind the twins, the silhouettes drew closer to the threshold. One of them raised an appendage, or perhaps it was a face, and turned toward her. There were no features, no eyes, yet she knew it saw her. The third voice, the twins said. "The offering, the final key." "I didn't mean to," she said. "I didn't know." "You knew enough," they said. "You understood. That is more than most." The darkness behind them surged forward, brushing the edge of the doorway. Eleanor felt the floor shudder beneath her boots. A smell flooded the chamber, something ancient and chemical, like burning metal and wet ash. It filled her lungs, sharp and dry. Then she heard it. Whispers, not in the twins' language, but in her own voice. They were her own thoughts, spoken aloud from the void. Fragments of her memories, moments twisted and reflected back at her with slight, impossible changes. Her father's voice calling her name, her childhood bedroom with the door open just a little too far, the sound of paper tearing in an empty room. "No," she said again, louder this time. The twins blinked, once, slowly, in perfect unison. "You already belong," they said. She couldn't move, couldn't run, but something broke loose inside her, something desperate and wild. She reached into her satchel and pulled out Anne's diary. With shaking hands, she tore the tape free of its casing and held it high. "If this is the key," she said, voice cracking, "then I'll break the lock." She hurled the tape at the stone floor. It struck the cavern's surface with a sharp crack, the casing shattering on impact. The magnetic reel inside spilled out like a ruptured vein, curling across the stone. The effect was immediate. The chanting stuttered. The light dimmed. The symbols faltered, flickering like dying embers. The doorway pulsed violently, as if rejecting the sudden disruption. The twins' faces twisted, not in pain, but in surprise. "You do not understand," they said. "You cannot stop it. The gate has opened. The alignment is perfect. You were never meant to end it, only to begin." Eleanor turned and ran, her boots slipping on the damp stone. Behind her, the sounds grew louder, like wings unfolding, like cities collapsing inward. She didn't look back. Couldn't. The mine tunnel seemed endless now, stretching, distorting. The flashlight flickered. Shadows clawed at the edges of her vision. She burst into the night air, soaked and gasping. The hillside was glowing, pale green light leaking from the mine's entrance like fog. Above, the sky churned with unnatural clouds, and rising from the light came shapes, dozens, then hundreds. They were coming through. Shapes rose into the storm-racked sky, silhouetted against lightning that flashed without thunder. They twisted in unnatural patterns, spiraling like birds caught in a silent cyclone. But Eleanor knew they were not birds. No creature made of flesh and bone moved like that. These were things birthed from the symbols, from the language, from the door itself. They slipped between dimensions as easily as wind slips through cracks. She stumbled away from the mine, slipping on wet grass and loose stone, her lungs burning from the cold and the climb. Every instinct screamed for her to keep running, to get as far from the entrance as possible. Behind her, the glowing light pulsed like a living heartbeat. The very earth seemed to breathe beneath her feet. She reached her car on trembling legs. Somehow, her hands managed the keys. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the haze. As she pulled away from the mine, she looked in the rearview mirror and froze. The mine was gone. The hill where it had stood now lay undisturbed, blanketed in mist and silence. No gate, no light, no pulsing symbols or impossible doorway, just grass, as if the mountain had never been opened. But Eleanor knew better. She drove without direction, driven only by instinct and terror. It wasn't until she reached the next town over, a sleepy little place called Bellbridge, that she stopped. She pulled into an empty rest area off the highway and sat in the car, hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. Her reflection stared back from the darkened window, pale and wide-eyed. Her mind buzzed with everything she'd seen, and something else too, an echo, the language. Even now it whispered in the spaces between her thoughts, etched into the rhythm of her breathing. She knew then that something had changed, not just in Binmar, in her. In the days that followed, she checked the news obsessively, expecting headlines, unexplained deaths, mass hysteria, UFO sightings, anything, but there was nothing. No reports of strange lights or missing people, not even a mention of Binmar. It was as if the town itself had blinked out of the public consciousness. When she returned a week later, she found the streets unchanged, calm, sleepy, ordinary. Children rode bikes past weathered storefronts. The diner served meatloaf and coffee, but the mine, sealed. Fresh concrete poured over the entrance. A new sign posted, "Danger, unstable terrain. Do not enter." The innkeeper at the Red Lion didn't recognize her. "No record of that booking," he said cheerfully. "Must be thinking of somewhere else." When she asked about Dr. Harris, she was told he'd left town for a family emergency. No one seemed to know where he'd gone. Margaret Jones answered the door at her cottage but gave no sign she remembered Eleanor at all. The mantel that once held family photos now displayed generic landscapes, trees, sunsets, mountains. And the hospital? Mr. Jenkins was still there in the archives, still stooped and pale, but when she asked about the symbols, his expression never changed. "No markings down here," he said. "Fire damaged the east wing, but it was contained. Everything's since been renovated." Eleanor made her way to the wall where she'd seen them burned into the concrete. Fresh plaster covered everything now, smooth, white, empty. Even her phone, where she'd stored photos, showed only static and blurred light where the symbols had once been. The tapes, silent, no voices, just white noise. The diary's ink had faded, the paper warped, the words unreadable. All that remained were her memories, and the whispers that visited her each night as she tried to sleep. Sometimes, in crowds, she'd catch a glimpse of them, two figures walking side by side, pale hair, black eyes, perfect synchronization. When she looked again, they were gone. But the dogs, wherever they were, always knew. They'd go silent, watching with alert, trembling eyes. Because the twins hadn't vanished. Not really. They had crossed over, and they had brought something with them. Eleanor returned to her home in Ithaca with a sense of unreality hanging over everything. Her apartment felt smaller somehow, the walls thinner, the silence deeper. She locked the door behind her and pulled the curtains closed, then sat in the middle of her living room surrounded by the remnants of her research. And yet, the most crucial pieces, the voices, the symbols, the photos, had vanished, scrubbed clean as if they'd never existed. But she remembered. She remembered everything, and worse, the twins' language now lived in her. Not just as sound, but as understanding. She could feel the rhythm of it in her heartbeat, see its structure in patterns of light and shadow. Her thoughts slipped between English and the other tongue without effort. It was no longer foreign. It was hers. She began hearing it in places it didn't belong. Static on the radio, wind rustling through trees, the ticking of the old grandfather clock in her hallway. Once, as she waited at a red light, she saw a child on the corner humming a melody that matched the cadence of the tape. The child met her eyes, smiled with too many teeth, then turned and vanished into the crowd. That night, she dug a hole in the garden beneath her rose bushes. Carefully, she placed her remaining notes, broken cassette pieces, and Anne's ruined diary inside a lead-lined box. She sealed it tight and buried it deep. Not to forget, but to contain. Whatever residue clung to those objects didn't belong in this world. It needed to stay hidden. Underground. Still, she didn't sleep. She wandered her apartment each night, the language whispering from the walls, from cracks in the ceiling, from dreams she no longer controlled. In those dreams, the twins stood in that vast stone chamber beneath the mine, now grown taller, darker. They never spoke, but they didn't need to. Their message burned through her mind with perfect clarity. This is not the end. She woke with symbols burned into her memory, lines and curves that didn't fade with consciousness. She began drawing them, not out of curiosity, but compulsion, on napkins, on fogged mirrors, on the margins of newspapers. Once, she found she'd scrawled one onto her own skin while asleep. Black ink smeared on her forearm, smeared and partial, but unmistakable. It wasn't just her own mind unraveling. Technology around her began to fail. Lights flickered when she entered rooms. Screens froze on blank static. Her voice recorders, even brand new ones, picked up the same low hum beneath every sound. A frequency beyond human hearing, but not beyond feeling. It vibrated through her bones like a warning, or a beacon. On the 7th night, her phone rang. The number was unlisted. She didn't want to answer. She did anyway. "Dr. Winters," said the voice on the line, and it wasn't Davis. It wasn't anyone she recognized. It was them, the twins, now older, deeper, more complete. "You opened the door," they said, calm as ever. "You heard us." "I destroyed the tape," she said, trying to hold steady. "I stopped the ritual." "There was no ritual," they replied. "Only resonance. Once heard, the words exist forever. Within you, around you, through you." "What do you want?" she demanded. "To be known," they answered. "To be spoken. We are the language beneath language, the root of all sound, the shape behind thought. And through you, we continue." The call ended. No click, no tone, just silence. Except it wasn't silence. She heard them now all the time, in wind, in water, in the hush before sleep, and always, always they were counting down. Not in English, not in the strange tongue, but in Welsh. Old Welsh, the way Margaret Jones' grandmother might have spoken. They were counting down, always counting, and Eleanor knew the numbers without needing to translate. The cadence of Old Welsh wove itself through every sound in her world. Rain tapping on the roof, the spin of ceiling fans, even her own heartbeat fell into rhythm, synchronized with voices she could no longer silence. Trideg nor, Trideg waith, Trideg saith. 39, 38, 37. It didn't stop when she left the apartment. It followed her into lecture halls, into grocery stores, into dreams she couldn't escape. Her colleagues began to avoid her, noting how she'd grown pale, gaunt, distracted. She rarely spoke in meetings anymore, and when she did, her voice seemed off, as if another language pressed at the edges of her words, waiting to bleed through. She stopped teaching halfway through the semester. Her students thought she was ill. She let them believe it. It was better than the truth. She took to walking the streets of Ithaca late at night, wrapped in her coat, scarf pulled high to her eyes. In those silent hours, when the town slept and the world felt thinner, she often saw them, two figures moving in eerie unison beneath the street lamps, sometimes on the opposite sidewalk, sometimes reflected in windows beside her, always just out of reach. She never chased them. Something in her knew better. Trideg chwech, Trideg pump, Trideg pedwar. The countdown continued, relentless and slow. She tried playing white noise at night, classical music, even recordings of her own voice. Nothing helped. The twins' language filtered through it all, like static woven into the fabric of reality. She began speaking aloud in their tongue, sometimes just a syllable, sometimes whole sentences. It wasn't intentional. It came from her without thinking, like breathing, and the dreams grew stronger. She stood again in the mine, the doorway open, the chamber lit by impossible geometry. The twins stood before her, aged and luminous. They never touched her, but the pressure of their presence was overwhelming, like standing before a collapsing star. "We are the key," they whispered. "But you are the door." She woke screaming. One afternoon, she received a parcel. No return address. No postage. Just a small cardboard box resting at her doorstep when she opened the door. Inside was a single item. An audio cassette, identical in size and shape to the first one she'd received months ago. No label. No writing. Her hands trembled as she placed it in her last working player. The tape began with static, then the sound of breathing, then voices. Not the twins. Hers. It was Eleanor's own voice, speaking in the twins' language. Calm, clear, articulating complex structures she'd never knowingly spoken before. The rhythm was unmistakable, the same cadence she'd analyzed so obsessively. Except now, she was the speaker. The recording ended without climax. Just her final breath and silence. And then, the dogs began again. Howling. Not just outside, but down the block, across the park, echoing from every shadowed corner of the city. A wave of animal dread rising like a storm surge. She collapsed to the floor, sobbing, clutching her hands over her ears. But the sound wasn't outside her anymore. It was inside her skull, inside her bones. The countdown accelerated. Ugain Dao, Ugain Un, Ugain. 22, 21, 20. She didn't need to ask what would happen when it reached one. She already knew, because the door didn't open in the mine. It didn't open in stone or flame or symbols etched into walls. It opened in her. She was the resonance, the echo chamber, the channel. She hadn't discovered the twins. They had chosen her. She hadn't just heard their voices. She'd become their vessel. Eleanor no longer needed recordings to recall the cadence. It lived inside her, etched into the folds of her mind like carvings in stone. She spoke it in her sleep. She murmured it under her breath in daylight. She once caught herself reciting phrases while stirring her coffee, unaware she'd spoken at all. The language was no longer foreign. It was as intimate as thought. Pimtheg, Pedwa ar Bimtheg, Dudig, 15, 14, 12. The countdown had grown erratic, as if the boundary between worlds had begun to fray. Some nights it accelerated, other times it slowed to a near halt, stretching time like a held breath before a scream. But always, always, it resumed. It never stopped, and with each number, the world around her became less stable. Mirrors flickered. Electrical devices failed when she approached. Children stared at her like they recognized something ancient behind her eyes. She saw birds gathering again, perching silently on windowsills, rooftops, telephone wires. Dozens at first, then hundreds, unmoving, watching. She tried to leave Ithaca, drove to the highway with no destination in mind, just a desperate need to escape. But her car died 5 miles outside town, engine failing without warning. When she walked back to the nearest service station, no one remembered seeing her arrive. One clerk asked if she was new in town. No one remembered her anymore. It was as if she were already fading. She returned home, the air inside her apartment colder than the winter outside, and waiting on her desk was another tape. No casing, just the exposed reel, gleaming in the dim light. She didn't play it. She didn't need to, because the words it contained were already inside her. She dreamed of the chamber again that night, but now she stood in front of the twins, not as an observer, but as a participant. Her hands outstretched, symbols carved into her arms, her voice joining theirs in perfect synchrony. Not imitation, completion. "We are almost there," the twins said, smiling that impossible smile. The pattern is formed, the triad complete. "What comes next?" she asked in the dream, though the answer was already pulsing inside her chest. "The awakening." She woke screaming. When she opened her eyes, the markings from the dream remained, burned faintly into her arms, as if traced by unseen hands. She scrubbed them with soap. They didn't fade, and the countdown continued. Scythe, Chwesh, Pump, 7, 6, 5. She no longer left her apartment, no longer ate. Sleep came in short, feverish bursts. She no longer questioned her sanity, because sanity had become irrelevant. Reality was bending, the world was slipping, and she could feel what waited beyond that final breath of silence. She pulled out every journal, every notebook, and burned them in the bathtub. She smashed her tape player to pieces. She painted over the symbols on her walls, but they reappeared overnight, drawn in condensation, in dust, in scratches beneath the paint. And still they watched. In reflections, in the corner of her vision, in dreams, Ellie and Evan Morgan, no longer children, no longer bound by age or time or form. They were heralds. That's what they had called themselves, and she now understood what that meant. They had been sent ahead, to prepare the voice, to open the way. She remembered the birds at the children's home, the girl who scratched symbols into her skin, the night all the dogs in town howled as one, the way every trace of the twins' presence vanished once they crossed over, as if their existence itself was an erasure, a deletion of everything but the purpose they served. And now, Eleanor was part of that purpose. She didn't fear what was coming, because part of her was already on the other side. Pedwa, Tri, Dao, 4, 3, 2. The final numbers echoed not from her lips, but from within her bones, reverberating with the weight of inevitability. Eleanor no longer lived in linear time. Each second bent under the pressure of something vast pushing through, squeezing into the cracks of the world. Her apartment lights buzzed with static energy. The walls pulsed like muscle. Every shadow whispered. She stood barefoot in the center of her living room. Around her, the symbols had reappeared, this time etched into the floorboards, the ceiling, even the glass of the windows. They burned with a cold, phosphorescent glow, breathing in rhythm with her own chest. The final moment was close. She didn't need to check a clock. She could feel it in her skin, in her breath, in the air vibrating just above her fingertips. Then came the silence. Not quiet, but the absence of sound. No wind, no distant cars. Not even the groan of the building settling. It was a silence too complete for the living world. A hush that signaled the arrival of something beyond understanding. And then, one. It was not spoken aloud, but the word pulsed like a detonation through her mind. The final lock turned, the last seal gave way. The room darkened, not by light fading, but by the invasion of something else, something vast and hungry. The corners of the apartment bent inward, folding space like paper, revealing a new dimension beneath the ordinary. And in the center of that distortion stood the twins. Ellie and Evan, not as she remembered them, not even as the aged reflections in the cave. They were more now, taller, elongated, skin smooth as porcelain, glowing faintly from within. Their black eyes shimmered with starlight. Their mouths didn't move, but she heard them clearly. "You have done well." Eleanor fell to her knees, not in worship, but in surrender. Her mind frayed at the edges, no longer tethered to the reality she had once known. "What comes through is older than language," the twins said. "Older than form. You are the door. Through you it speaks." The air behind them rippled like water catching fire. A form began to emerge, not walking, not stepping, but manifesting. It twisted as it came, unfolding in impossible geometry. Eleanor saw wings with no bodies, eyes without sockets, teeth arranged in fractal spirals. And yet, It wasn't monstrous. It was true. It was the truth behind truth. And as it came, Eleanor began to speak. The language poured from her like blood from a wound. Her mouth moved without consent. The symbols on the walls shimmered in response. The building cracked. Foundations buckled. Reality thinned to transparency. Through her, the thing spoke into the world, and the world listened. Every dog in Ithaca howled. Every mirror clouded. Every screen flickered to static. Around the world, those who were sensitive to the strange and the hidden felt it. An itch in the soul, a wrongness in the air. Some dreamed of twins, some woke screaming. Most would forget by morning, but some would not. The heralds turned as one, faces unreadable. Their task was complete. Eleanor collapsed. When she awoke, she was alone. The symbols were gone. The cracks in the walls had vanished. The apartment was clean, quiet, untouched. Only she remembered. But she was not the same. She walked the streets of Ithaca again, unnoticed. She sat in the library, reading books she had once loved but now found empty. Her voice remained silent. Yet the language never left her. She passed people on the street and sometimes caught them staring, not at her, but through her, like something was watching from behind her eyes. She never heard from the twins again, but she knew they were still here, somewhere, and what they brought through now moves among us. It wears no name, it speaks no lies, it needs no temple, because it already has a voice, hers, and it is still speaking, still whispering, still calling, and somewhere in the dark, something else is listening.